Lightsaber lore. You ever wonder why you don't see sliding techniques in lightsaber duels? I mean, logically you would think that they would utilize them. Two blades come together, one opponent gets the upper hand and then slides the blade to take off the other opponent's head. But that doesn't happen in duels, and there's actually an in-canon reason for this. And that's because the lightsabers have a small magnetic pull to them. It's not strong enough for you to feel it in most cases, but it is strong enough to the point to where when two lightsabers come into contact, their two magnetic pulls act on each other and they lock in place. It doesn't mean you can't slide them down, but it does mean that you have to use an extra amount of strength, way more effort than needed, and it'll be way too slow for it to be effective. Because of this, when lightsabers lock in place, it turns into kind of a dance where the two opponents are trying to get the upper hand on each other. And the only way to break the lock is to separate them completely, pulling away. With one exception, and that is what the ancient Jedi and Sith used, which was Force blades before the invention of lightsabers. Force blades had all the power of a lightsaber and could be slid back and forth with no magnetic draw. However, maintaining these things was a pain since they had to spend most of the time meditating just to get their force crystals to power these things, as opposed to a lightsaber tech that uses a focusing emitter. And that's why sliding techniques don't work in lightsaber duels. Lightsaber lore. So tell me, what's something about the lightsabers in the Star Wars universe that they share with the lightsabers that we use to make these fun videos? I mean, aside from the fact that they both look really cool. Well, the answer to that is that they both run on a battery. You see, while the lightsaber blade may run off of the crystal inside, that crystal is being operated by a focusing emitter, and that focusing emitter is running on a battery. Now, how long do these batteries last? Well, the answers have varied. Some have said 1,000 years, some have said 100 years, some said a few years. But in truth, I believe it really all depends on what lightsaber you're talking about, who made it, how good they were at making it, and what materials they had on them at the time. But one thing that rings true, any lightsaber wielder, Jedi, Sith, or anyone in between, would always want to make sure that their battery was nice and charged before going out on their day. Because while for us, running out of a battery might mean we have to wait a few hours for our next video, for them, it meant certain doom. Lightsaber lore. Did you know that your lightsaber could potentially explode? Well, I mean, not these, thankfully, but in the Star Wars universe, lightsabers are extremely complicated to construct, and the parts inside of them are very, very sensitive. Plus, they're housing both the battery and your lightsaber crystal, so a massive amount of power in the palm of your hand. This is why lightsaber construction is one of the first things you learn when training under a good master, because if you get it wrong, even by a little bit, it could cause a chain reaction which will overload your crystal, and before you know it, lightsaber lore. As we all know, blaster deflection looks really cool, but unfortunately, it's an extremely limited defense because it only really works on standard blasters and pistols. Once enemies start using stronger weapons that have a much bigger impact, it becomes harder and harder to defend. On top of that, your lightsaber offers no defense against weapons like shotguns because the blade is just not wide enough to protect you from the spread. And don't even get me started on flamethrowers. Lightsaber lore. Properly made lightsabers have a couple of adjusters on them. One of those adjusters is for controlling the length of your blade. Because of this, one has the freedom to make their blade as long as a claymore if they choose to, or they can bring it down to the size of a dagger or even a small knife. Now, the purpose of this feature is so that one can make their blade long enough to complement both their height and their fighting style so that they can fight freely without making any mistakes. The downside to this is that the settings have to be locked in prior to combat, so you're not going to be able to just extend your blade out and strike your opponent when they're not looking. The upside, though, is that if you end up having to fight with someone else's lightsaber and you have a free moment, you can adjust it to your liking before you swing away. Lightsaber lore. Properly made lightsabers have a couple of adjusters on them, and while one of those adjusters is for the length of the blade, the other is controlling the strength of the blade, meaning your lightsaber doesn't always have to be in kill mode. Now, there's a variety of settings that can turn it down to, but the most common settings, aside from full strength, is stun mode and practice mode, because Jedi don't always want to kill their enemies or their Padawans or younglings, most of the time. Funny enough, though, Sith also have these adjusters as standards on their blades, and even though they don't turn their blades off too often, they still keep the settings there just in case the moment arises that they actually have to use it. So, your lightsaber is actually more akin to being a sci-fi Swiss Army knife. Lightsaber lore. Did you know that the Death Star was essentially a giant lightsaber? That's right. Now, while it was the size of the moon, it had a whole crew and all kinds of different functions and blah, 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 its main planet-busting cannon was being powered by a series of giant kyber crystals. So, This means that the Empire used the literal force to blow up Alderaan. And it also explains why when Luke blew up the Death Star, the explosion was so massive. Because we all know what happens when a kyber crystal's energy becomes unstable. Lightsaber lore. Just how hot is your lightsaber? Well, your lightsaber can be burning anywhere between 18,000 and 25,000 degrees Celsius. To put that into context, the surface of our sun is only burning at about 5,600 degrees Celsius. So that means that your lightsaber is literally 3 to 4 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Keyword being surface. The closer you get to the center of the sun, the degree starts going into the millions, and we really don't know just how hot the core of the sun actually is. So this brings a few things into context, like why there's no edge alignment to a lightsaber, because you're not cutting through objects, you're burning through them. And this also explains why certain materials can resist a lightsaber strike, like Mandalorian Beskar. It's really just a matter of the melting point of the Beskar armor being high enough to resist a lightsaber strike. But that does bring up a new question. Just how hot are those Mandalorian forges, and how the hell are they able to survive in them while making the armor? Lightsaber lore. How is it even possible to use a lightsaber when it's burning hotter than the surface of the sun? I mean, in our reality, the moment you went to turn a weapon like this on, this should happen. But that's not what happens, at least not in the world of Star Wars, and that's all because of some good old science fiction. You see, the battery of the lightsaber turns on the focusing emitter, which then sends a charge into the lightsaber crystal, getting it to send a beam of energy through a series of superconductors until it passes through the lightsaber lens. This entire process creates the lightsaber blade. However, it's not really a blade, it's actually a containment field that's trapping all of the heat inside, not allowing any of it to escape, so that it cannot act on anything unless it makes direct contact, thus protecting the wielder and any bystanders that they don't want to immediately die. Lightsaber lore. Why is it we don't see more lightsabers made from lightsaber-resistant material? I mean, we know it's possible because Darth Sidious's lightsabers were made from such material, so how come we don't see it more often? Even if not among the Jedi, how come we don't see it as a common thing among the Sith? Especially the staff users, since that would alleviate their most glaring weakness. Well, the reason for that is because of a number of complications that just get in the way. First one being the rarity of the metals, with Beskar being the most common of the rare metals, so that should let you know just how hard it is to get your hands on one of these things. Then, even if you do get your hands on some, then you need to find somebody who is an expert at forging the material, and then you'll most likely need somebody else who is an expert at crafting lightsaber parts. From there, you need to be both connected enough and rich enough to be able to bring this all together so that they can make you your one special lightsaber. So unfortunately, if you're not as rich and connected as Darth Sidious was, then you're most likely going to be out of luck.